Welcome to Meat and Potatoes Podcast. Today we're joined by Brian Singer, who is the CPO and founder of Nobl9. How are you, Brian?
I'm great today, Garrett. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, our pleasure here. All right, so tell the folks listening and watching what is Nobl9 and what is your role in the company?
Sure. So Nobl9 is a platform that helps companies achieve the right level of reliability for their software and services. And I always like to refer back to Mark Zuckerberg said, move fast and break things. And pretty much everything we've done in DevOps over the past 4 or 5 years has been to enable more velocity in our development teams to ship features faster. But the question becomes, how much can we break things, right? What is too broken? And Nobl9 employs a concept called service level objectives and error budgets to help developers and reliability engineers measure the reliability of their services and make sure that they're hitting the right marks for what their customers are expecting.
Got it. So it's ERROR, not AIR metrics then.
Yeah, error, yeah.
Cool. Can you give us kind of an example of what that might be in the real world, whether it's a theoretical company or client or an actual case study?
Sure. I think a great example from the real world, and I'll just pull one from Google as a theoretical example because everyone knows Google. If you're using Gmail and you try to go to gmail.com and it takes an extra 5 seconds to load that homepage once a month or so, that really doesn't bother you. Probably think, oh, my connection was a little bit slow. But if every time you go to gmail.com, it takes an extra 15 seconds to load, that's probably kind of annoying, and you might start to look for another service. So SLOs help us find kind of that right level of reliability, whether it's response time or availability or something else in your user journey that is going to keep your users happy, but also give your development teams enough flexibility to be able to release and make mistakes and do things that allow them to have some innovation and velocity with what they're doing.
Got it. So in a world where nobody's really happy with any result, you guys are trying to be the middleman and broker that, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're again using Gmail, for example, and every 1 in 100 emails doesn't get through, it just gets dropped, you're going to be pretty annoyed by that, right? So the level of reliability for that service, the one that actually accepts incoming email, has to be a lot higher than maybe what's on the front end. And so the challenge for teams is, as the software footprint is growing and, the service itself becomes part of the product that we're delivering, is finding that level of trade-off that's acceptable.
Got it. Yeah. So every once in a while, whether it's friends or family, there'll be, did you get that text, right? And every once in a while, it's a no, right? You check on your phone. I sent it. No, you didn't. And I'm always worried that, at some point I'll be like on the family farm or something and get pinned under a tractor, and that'll be the one text that doesn't make it through. So
yeah.
The phone companies and the carriers, they have a higher standard, we would hope.
Yeah. And, some services have to be very high reliability, right? Have to be 459s. That's also very expensive. And if it makes sense, that's great. And if it doesn't make sense, then you have to look at what you can actually achieve. And part of the challenge is, as we implement sort of modern software architectures with a lot of dependencies and microservices and whatnot, you end up with kind of this tail latency problem or fan out problem where you want to get to something that is reliable 99.99% of the time on the front end. Well, the services that it's calling into on the back end have to typically have an extra 9 of reliability, right? And you eventually get to a point where it's almost impossible to achieve that, and very costly. And the analogy I like to use is, if you look at the difference between a Ford and a very expensive car, you're like McLaren's, for example, the difference in cost, a lot of that is driven by the precision of the parts in terms of how you machine them and what the tolerances are and whatnot. And software is no different. Like if we have really tight tolerances in software, it's very expensive to achieve those.
Yeah. Yeah. People have to build it, and groups like you have to be a part of it for sure.
Yep.
All right. So what's led you to your role here with Nobl9? A quick summary of your career and a couple of the stops on the train where you learned a lot.
Sure. Well, I actually got my start in enterprise software at Nobl. So definitely familiar with the Silicon Slopes. And I'm also an avid skier, so try to make it there as much as I can. But eventually I realized I wanted to start a company, and this was when cloud was starting to really become in vogue, and found an opportunity to get into a space around enterprise cloud marketplaces, and that was a company called Orbitera, and we kind of grew up with the cloud, and eventually we were acquired by Google, and so I was a part of Google Cloud for about 3 years. And my experience there was actually taking a product that we had built on Amazon, and we felt like we were pretty good at operating it, and bringing that into Google's production environment and applying some of their production practices was the first exposure I had to sort of the practice of reliability engineering, the way that Google performed it. And I think as an entrepreneur, you look at these things and you kind of take out the concepts that you think might be applicable to the broader market. And within the context of bringing that platform into Google and sort of productionizing it in Google Stack, we did employ these service level objectives and error budgets, and of course using Google tooling and all of those things. And said, wow, these concepts are really powerful. Like it makes sense. Like we should be measuring how reliable our services are, not just looking at, at a point in time, how long is it taking me to respond to a particular request. And so that was sort of led to us to believe that there is an opportunity to build a platform that's focused on solving this particular problem. And then, from a process standpoint, in terms of Nobl9, I'm a big believer in getting a lot of customer feedback early on. So we sort of started that journey by talking to the companies that we thought would be the most likely users of the software. And that was probably a series of 40 to 50 conversations that we had probably, before we even started building any product. And that, our process was sort of taking that and then using it to prioritize sort of features that would be relevant to those customers. And then, from there, we moved into beta. And, our goal, we get to, where we are as a company was to, try to really prove that this was a commercially viable product. There's market demand. And we had built a product with features that had enough market fit that we could start to go to market.
Oh, interesting. So going back to the acquisition by Google, you've obviously got the negotiations on price, and there's lots of documents to sign, I would assume. What is the process like from the technical side to, as you mentioned, building it on the Google stack? And is that what your main role was in that acquisition?
Yeah, so as kind of the product lead, was responsible for integrating it in with, in the context of sort of, what we were trying to do with the product. And for us, that meant, we had a product that was running on AWS. That meant running it on GCP. Now Google, it's no secret, they have sort of an internal technical stack called Borg. And then they have obviously their cloud service, which anyone can go buy, Google Cloud Platform. And since we had built this product on AWS, it made a lot of sense for us to kind of eat our own dog food and run it on GCP. And so that's what we did. I'd say we were probably one of the early adopters of Kubernetes for production use case. And I think what was really interesting was bringing the site reliability engineering and Google production practices to a product that was not running on the internal Google infrastructure, but on Google Cloud, and learning kind of how we could do that with the Google engineering team was a great experience.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I apologize. This is way above my pay grade, but I do find it interesting. So at some point, the Google folks were looking at what you guys had built, whether it's the code or the architecture or something like that. What's the decorum in those types of situations if they're like, what is that? Or why did you build it like that? How does that go? Or am I off
No, it is an interesting question. I think, any product you look at, you can, an engineer can come in and look at it and say, well, I would have built this differently, or why would you build it that way? And I kind of look at software as something that actually, especially if you're running it as a service, it's actually continually being rewritten. And some engineers that are much smarter than me said, you should always really be looking at how you're going to re-architect your application every 3 or 4 years, because there's going to be new technologies you can take advantage of, and there's going to be changes in the underlying customer requirements and whatnot. So I think certainly, you ask the questions, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it that way? You usually have pretty good reasons, right? Around time to market, or, there was a particular customer asking for this. And then I think in an acquisition, you have an opportunity to reassess and say, what are the pieces that we want to redo or we want to keep? And what are the pieces that, don't necessarily make sense to continue investing in? And so, all of that is part of just, the overall integration process, I think, for Google or any company.
Wow, interesting. So in this particular example, was there one person where the buck stopped and it was like, feelings be damned, like, we're going to go this way? Or was it collaborative? How did that work?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say pretty collaborative. Not, folks who've spent a lot of time at Google know that it is kind of a very bottoms up culture. Kind of the best ideas tend to bubble up, no matter where they come from. And it's a very data driven and I would say almost a little bit of an academic environment, right? Where you're making arguments and you're making decisions a lot of the time, over written word. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a particular, hey, the buck stops here and we're going to make it's more about the collaborative decision making and, coming to the right decision for the business.
Cool. Yeah, that's a whole new interesting world that you're very familiar with, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So then, the ideas are percolating, and you've kind of mentioned how you had a lot of conversations before the product was built and beta with Nobl9. So you guys recently just did a Series B fundraising, and Sorenson Capital is involved in that. What's that process like? Do you enjoy it? And what are you going to use the funds for?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, you look at the different funding rounds and like whatever you call them, Series A or Series B, you're typically looking at different milestones for a company. And for us, off of our Series A, we really wanted to prove the commercial viability of what we were building. So is there a big enough market? Is there demand for this product? Are companies willing to pay for it? How much are they willing to pay? Making sure we have the right features. And then once you have that locked in, as a startup, you want to have enough capital that you can then go to market and build the distribution that you need to ultimately be successful. I think if you listen to a lot of folks about how you build software companies and whatnot, and I'm a believer in this, like the distribution side of it is just as important as the product, because if you can't get it into the hands of customers and you can't solve their problems, and especially in the enterprise where the environments are typically really complex, it doesn't matter how good the product is that you built. Your company ultimately won't be successful. So for us, in order to build that distribution capability and in order to build an enterprise product, we knew we had to raise more money, and that goes toward hiring salespeople, hiring support engineers, customer success, of course, growing the engineering team as well. If you looked at our company pre-Series B, it was very engineering heavy, right? And probably 80% engineering, right? And then 20% just starting to build, think about go to market. Now that's not to say you're not talking to customers. We had a lot of customers in beta, but it's a different skill set of talking to customers and having them in beta versus going out and selling to them. And then if you look at us, probably in 6 months or a year, right, it's going to probably be closer to 50-50 or even more weighted a little bit heavily toward the go-to-market. And that's what you'd expect to see in a software company as it grows, just because, software is one of those things where you build a business that's worth something from the leverage and the scale, right? So you can scale the go-to-market without necessarily linearly scaling up the engineering team.
Okay, so what was your role in the fundraising, and did you enjoy that aspect of it, or were you happy when it was over?
Yeah, sure. So from a fundraising standpoint, I think we were in I would say pretty fortunate position to have a really engaged set of investors from our Series A that were looking for us to hit some specific milestones before the next round. So for us, my co-founder and me, you want to basically, build a market around the company. So you want to, and I don't think it's that different from like a free agent in the NFL or the MLB going out and establishing the market. Like even if you're going to come back to the team that you're already playing for, which is kind of similar to going back to the same investors that you had in a previous round, which is what we did for our leads. You want to go out and sort of test the market and establish what what the right valuation is for the company. So we work backward a little bit. We try to understand, well, what are the milestones that we want to hit before we raise more money? What are the personnel, what sort of investments do we need to make to get there? And that sort of informs the amount that we're raising. And then, it really is up to the market in terms of what sort of valuations you can get. And I think we're fortunate we're in a period that is probably more company friendly, and valuations are good. For us though, you don't want to go too far over your skis on valuation, because it can make it very difficult for a company to go then raise the next round of funding. And so, finding that sort of right value for the company, right amount of dilution there's a little bit of art there, and definitely some math. So for us, we went out, obviously pitched a bunch of VCs, but ultimately came back to our Series A investors to lead that. Those Battery and CRV. And then we looked for, a couple of firms that we felt, we really wanted to work with. And one of those was Sorenson Capital, had a great reputation. And really, we felt like had a really good understanding of the industry and the types of customers that we wanted to work with and would be helpful for us in future rounds of financing.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, there's an art and a science to it, and depending on who you ask it at the time, it's either art or cool. Well, very cool. So the meat and potatoes part of this podcast is questions on how you kind of manage your day. What tools do you use, whether it's pen and paper or Slack or whatever? And how do you prefer to interact with your team and customers? What are some tricks that you've utilized over the years to stay on task?
So we're pretty distributed. We have a pretty large development team in Poland, and we're in Boston and we're in LA. So we rely heavily on tools to keep us all connected. The ones you would expect to start with, Zoom and Slack, for sure. We're pretty heavy users of Google Docs, just in terms of, and maybe this is some of the Google culture wearing off on us, but trying to communicate in written word as much as possible, I think is really important for remote teams, because you can always come back. Other people who maybe weren't part of the conversation can come in and see what was decided on. So we make pretty heavy use of that for like design docs and for writing down product requirements. And then a lot of our day-to-day development activity is managed through Jira. We're pretty heavy Jira users, and I'd say my one piece of advice there is that the tool can't solve everything for you. You need people to be really invested in the process around it. And so we're fortunate to work with really great technical program managers and product managers that help us utilize the capabilities of the tools that we have to the fullest extent. So it is a combination of people and process and tooling. And I would just add, like the space that we're in around reliability is very similar. Trying to determine how reliable a product should be is actually something that takes a product manager who knows a little bit about how a customer is using it, and maybe a business executive who understands what the impact is to the finances of the company and the bottom line and whatnot, as well as the engineers that are building that software.
Got it. And then when it gets too crazy or depressing, you go skiing.
Absolutely. Although it's getting a little too warm for that now. So, have to figure out, maybe a little bit of golf this year.
I love it. Very cool. All right. So around the same time you announced that funding, you also announced the availability of the Nobl9 service level objective platform.
Yep.
What is that, and what was the reasoning behind that?
So yeah, the SLO platform is the product that allows companies to measure the reliability of their systems and make decisions based on the data. And we, like I mentioned, we went through a beta period with a number of early users, and felt like it was the right time to really start to bring this product to market and sell it. And I think for an enterprise product like what we're building, customers care about things like reliability, security, whatnot. So, you're investing not just in the features and the capabilities, but also in the underlying platform. And what I think one of the things that we found that's really interesting, and I think is a good sign for, if you're looking at building a product in a new market, is that, there are a lot of companies out there that had maybe invested a little bit in homegrown solutions, right? Or they were supporting something on their own, didn't quite get to where they wanted it to be. But that gives you the opportunity to come in and part of the ROI is, well, now you don't have to support this internal product, right? You might have had 2 or 3 engineers on this, and now we can support that for you. Now we can provide the service for you. And in order to do that, again, if it's an enterprise service, the investments you have to make in security, you have to get things like SOC 2 compliance, and you have to, obviously make sure that you can meet privacy and other legal and regulatory requirements, is just as important as the actual features that you're building. Obviously, the features have to work, but you're not going to get it into an enterprise's hands if you can't do the other things as well.
Yeah, people like it when you can show the ROI and make it fairly simple.
Yeah.
Kind of dumb people like me, that's the selling point.
Well, yeah, and you got to be able to do one thing really, really well. I look at some of the most successful products of the past decade. You think about like Twilio and PagerDuty. They took what is a fairly straightforward idea, like Twilio, like send a text message, but made it a platform, do it really well. It's one less service that you have to carry a pager for internally. And I think you see a lot more of that over time. If you don't have to support a service, once you understand what it takes to hit certain reliability benchmarks, then that's great, right? That's operational load off your team.
Yeah, and you can focus on other stuff. We need a lot of that here with this little nonprofit, Silicon Slopes.
We'll see what we can do for you.
All right, and then on May 17th, you guys are will be hosting the first SLO conference for site reliability engineers. That'll be
Yep.
fun. That's a whole different industry events. I'm sure you've got somebody else kind of working the logistics there, but what's the plan for that, and what are your goals with that?
Yeah, so it's really exciting. I think you know, SRE, if you talk about like site reliability engineering as a practice, is one of the fastest growing areas within tech. Like if you look at LinkedIn job postings alone and the growth, I think it's like the #2 job on LinkedIn right now for tech. So don't quote me on that. It may not be exactly #2, but it's growing very, very fast. And one of the core competencies for an SRE is establishing these reliability goals. You know, but it is a combination of the technology that we hope to bring and people and processes and culture to be able to do that. And there hasn't been an industry conference focused on helping folks that are kind of earlier in the journey establish that culture, figure out what are the right metrics. And so our goal is to just make that more prevalent in the industry, make that knowledge more accessible so that people can sort of upskill themselves and bring that back to the teams that they're working with. And I like to say, like, SLOs, since you're trying to find that right amount of reliability, the trade-off between we're going to page our engineers all the time and the service is down for customers, it really does, I think, make people's lives better, right? Because you're not going to bother your engineers unless there really is an issue that's impacting the customers. And on the flip side of that, if you do have something that's customer impacting, right, the customer knows that it's something that's taken seriously.
Yeah, well, I hope a lot of folks attend that, because I'll always be a customer. I'll never be the engineer. And just like everybody else, it's just infuriating when things don't work, or if they're slow or buggy. So the more folks attending that and getting good at site reliability, the better for the consumer.
Absolutely.
All right, so if folks are interested in attending that or participating in that, is there somewhere they can go to find more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a website, www.sloconf.com, and then there's the SLO Conf Twitter handle. So you can just do a Twitter search for SLO Conf and find that as well. But all the information is right there.
And we'll put it in the description as well. All right. Well, this has been insightful for me. Not my world, but it's interesting to learn what smart people like you and your team are figuring out there in the world, and these platforms are really great. Congratulations on the fundraising, and good luck with a conference, whether it's virtual or in person. It's a fair amount of work.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, definitely. We have a great team behind it, and I'm hopeful people will really enjoy it.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Brian. We'll look forward to your continued success, and we'll see you next time you're out here.
Great. Thanks, Garrett. Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.